Is July 9th, 2024. We're grateful for your attendance and your time. We're going to focus on a quick review of some of the advancements over this last week, which actually covered a birthday for the country of America. We're grateful for those hosts and attendants that are actually here with us, specifically some of our guests, which we'll get into in just a bit. As a reminder, this is a private membership association. Some of the things we talk about may be forward-looking. Things right now in society are somewhat crazy as we're coming into the election cycles. Again, just recently, last month, actually just about a month ago, Julian Assange was actually released, which has a lot to do with parts and pieces of free speech and some of the things that have happened in our time frame. We actually have a special guest that's with us here, Jeffrey Warnock. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things that he taught long ago and turned on lights for me as an individual. And this will actually be the first time that we talk about what we call the Republic for the United States of America. So we'll dig into some of that after we look at basically the last 248 years of what this country has added to humanity, not just to the states that we look at that represent the 50 states of the United States of America, but for humanity in general. And then maybe look at, what is currently happening within society, and then how we can actually individually be leaders within our own sphere and influence and the things that we choose to do every day. So we're getting some feedback there, but we're grateful for those that are in attendance. This is kind of some of those that are online. And before we jump into it, I'd like to just talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done in the last 2 years regarding a movement within the Pacific. So we've been to about 26 different countries and really helping these different countries to come together in a very united way, tied to what Mr. Phil Lane, which started back in 2005, actually opened the doors. And that was actually in Hawaii on the Big Island. Grateful for his involvement. He's still alive and kicking, and we need to be able to do more with him. But we've been able to work with multiple different kingdoms, from the Kingdom of Atui, Aotearoa, which is New Zealand, Hawaii, or the Hawaiian Kingdom. Also some of the elements within the Haitian environment, Indonesia and Samoa. There's others as well that we'll talk a little bit about that are kind of being pulled in from Tuvalu and Texan, Vanuatu, and Fiji. And from these different environments actually sparked an element of the Pacific Union. And the Pacific Union basically does a counterbalance to what the European Union is doing. Instead of the European Union focusing on things around GDPR with cookies and where people are going digitally, it focuses on really privacy and where they're going both digitally and physically. So it actually meets the digital world, meets the physical world, and it combines primarily the first region, which is Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia, which is almost half of the whole Earth. Literally over 40 billion acres, 25,000 islands, and many countries that have said, hey, so out of the 26 countries that we met with, many of them that said, hey, we will get behind what this stands for. Not only that, but we will help lead it because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing from a spiritual standpoint, from a values and virtue standpoint. We're getting some feedback. We're going to try and figure out where that's at. Welcome, Jen. It's good to have you. So,
hi, thanks for having me. Sorry I'm late.
You're welcome. You're welcome. We're streaming live. It's good to have you here. So these different environments, they really are doing it for the right reasons. Why? Because they actually care about whether you call them nationals or citizens or residents. These countries don't necessarily want to just profile or control their citizens or individuals within their jurisdiction. And so when you look at it, there's a lot of different countries that basically link to a new future financial system. Everybody talks about it. Everybody can see pieces of it. For those of you who have been following along, whether it's in the audience or just reviewing, there's a financial system that is not just theoretical. It's here. And whether we define it as banks that ties to the existing fiat system or a future system that will actually do things locally or cross-border, it's all the same. And that system will tie to different types of currency systems, some that are decentralized and some that are centralized and centrally controlled. The goal is to be able to, when the dust settles from all of this, truly decentralization actually reigns. And whether that ties to other assets that we currently use, or whether it ties to precious metals that are backing certain assets, or it ties to membership systems that then enables different vendors, because it's all about commerce. We basically are either making money or spending money, and who makes the money makes the rules, as we know. And so when we have different vendors that say, hey, we'll actually accept a decentralized identity, or maybe payments, or maybe offer rewards, or maybe even define, in the world of payments today, they're all basically centralized globally. But with decentralized payments, it can absolutely free humanity. Why? Because they can actually have choice again. So when we talk about this Oceanic Coalition meets the Pacific Union, then it starts getting into specific environments. And the Hawaiian Kingdom was one of the first ones. And it's probably one of the most complicated ones to touch on. Why? Because within the 1830s, it was annexed, I would say illegally annexed, primarily because Mr. Dole, when he actually was given the opportunity to grow food, he took advantage of that. Not only did he feed his family, but he started making a commercial business on it. Then he started getting more lands, then doing more with it. And then Mr. Dole turned a kingdom of Hawaii into a republic of Hawaii, and then into a state of Hawaii. So we're going to talk a little bit about what these republics meant back in the day and how it's a slippery slope into environments. Now, don't bleed in statehood within the Hawaiian Kingdom as something that's confusing around kind of some of these futuristic things that we'll talk about with other states, even though they may have happened in the same dispensation, specifically in the same decade. So when we look at what happened with the Hawaiian Kingdom, or the state of Hawaii, to the state of Texas, those things happened within the same 1830s to 1840s. The difference is there was a treaty with a country of Texas that basically said, we will reserve the right to secede from the United States if we so vote. And the land is actually owned by the Texans. So when they look at it, there's no DLNR in the state of Texas. Yet you're seeing natural conflicts between border issues from a federal standpoint and then a state standpoint, and questioning whether they should stand up on their own and actually say, literally take the state of Texas with an S to Texan with a nation standpoint. Now, what's interesting is I spent the last 3 weeks in Texas and was very, very eye-opening to see how many people were like, you don't even need to go to the nation side of it. The state of Texas will literally engage something like this. All we have to do is ask. We really believe that they would actually take some of their systems that are providing governmental services to actually enable individuals to own their own identity. And so what that means for some of the new listeners, there's in each one of these different jurisdictions that we talked about. So when we look at these different countries here, or kingdoms or providences, each one of them has their own, not just sites and systems, but they also have their own app. And so their own app will work on any Apple device, any Android device, as well as any Clear-based device. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. But what it does is it provides the individual with their own identity with encryption keys that then use derived keys to actually let them navigate with the future of technology, navigating around artificial intelligence and machine learning. What this does is it provides identity for them, for the individuals. Whether you're born, what's interesting is yet last night, cadavers came up as another one. So whether you're born, married, whether you go through getting a driver's license or maybe a weapon license, if that's needed in a certain jurisdiction, all the way to the point of death. And then they're talking about cadaver registration as well. So the point is registration, certifications, certificates, all of these different things. Some people would say, why do I actually need them? And others say, well, I can see why they're valuable or why they're needed. But the important part is, will centralized systems or borders or stores allow them to be a valid form of ID? For instance, if we dig into one of these, let's say this little youth right here. So this little guy has a first name, but you can't see his last name. So I don't know if you can notice there, but they're actually X's and O's. And so if someone wants to see it, they would actually scan, and they don't need anything other than a normal phone that's out there that does the QR code scanning. But what it does is it actually finds who's accountable for this little guy. So let's say that these are the parents here. It would actually ping the mother and the father and say, can we actually get validation of his name and verification that you actually have access or control or authority over this individual. Now, the framework that all this runs on is the whole town world meeting while you're here in the digital world. This is a system that no one owns, no one controls, but we can all benefit from it, right? So think about it as kind of like a utility or a framework for humanity in the future that has different services that it delivers, from identity, which we just started talking about, to voting, to land management, to payments, to maybe if different things around notarization, etc. Lots of different systems and services that can be governed by folks that just come in and have a voice. They don't even need to be involved. Everyone can have a voice. And then there's certain service providers that can actually plug into that. And that's the world that I personally come from, is the service provider world. First part of our lives, and a lot of people on this call, we spent the first 15 years of our lives building what's called the managed service provider industry from a centralized standpoint, seeing that centralized systems are absolutely wrong. Now it's a $256 billion industry. We helped create it starting in 2000 with Intel, and then basically working with Hewlett Packard when we were saying goodbye to it, but then started decentralized systems in 2009. And those decentralized systems, service providers really do play a big role in it. So for instance, you can have service providers or services that plug into these other jurisdictions. So imagine jurisdictions. Maybe it's Brazil, maybe it's Mexico, maybe it's Canada, and they all come from different roots, right? The way that they were actually founded. Some are based upon colonialism, some are based upon annexations, etc. But when we look at it, we look at different capabilities that decentralization can actually bring to free these different societies. And when we talk about the Hawaiian Kingdom and then Texas, they're two very different animals. Why? Because within Hawaii today, there's a recognized state, but many don't recognize it. Why? Because it truly was illegally annexed. When you look at what's happening, though, the state of Hawaii is still very much there and standing up and operating because people choose it. They allow it. It's what we choose. And in Texas, it's very interesting because they have the choice to actually do what the Hawaiian kingdoms are struggling to identify themselves. What's interesting is about 10 years ago, there was a 100-year anniversary, actually a little bit longer than that, where the two presidents of the United States at different times basically said, here's an apology letter. We're sorry. What happened was wrong. Stand up and take your country back. Take your kingdom back. And it's interesting to see how many different groups are doing that. Wonderful folks. I mean, just absolutely heart of gold. Intentions are all right, going in the same directions, but they're doing it from different approaches. And there is some neat things that we're seeing around unity there. But when you look at the Hawaiian Kingdom, you see some confusion. You see some missteps. But then when you go to look at Texas, I personally see a state that is well run. I'm not saying it doesn't have its dysfunctions. I'm not saying that it can't do things better. But I can see a heart of a people that is united, even though the borders have been wide open. And I don't know what the numbers are. I've seen numbers between 10 to 18 million. And in my opinion, we're on one world with one people. But the key is, do we have checks and balances and identity? For instance, people that actually are going through borders or even getting out of prison, believe it or not, they have problems tracking identity for people that get out of prison. Now, I'm not just talking about Texas. I'm talking about humanity in general. And why is it? Why is it that people are crossing borders and coming out of prisons are difficult? They struggle to track them. But on the flip side, where is it that they really track us a ton? Like literally a ton. At the airports. If you haven't been through the airports, and for me personally, I actually don't use a valid passport and I don't use a valid ID. And there's reasons why. One is so that I can understand what happens when you don't. What happens when people want to travel and they can't. And when you really understand the Constitution of the United States of America, which was the first constitution that many other constitutions started from, the right to privacy and the right to travel are two constitutional protected, and I believe, human rights that we should all have. But when you look at this, May 7th, 2025, this beautiful little date that they literally have pushed 3 times, but it's going to be at 100% full force when this hits through. What's going to happen when this actually doesn't, when you don't have these real IDs? In 300, what is this, 301 days from now? Well, in my opinion, we talk about centralized systems and centralized control. What happens when the real ID that identifies your physical being links up with a payment system? That's where centrally we have to stop this. And I look at Texas, and I believe that Texas is actually one of the states that can actually see what's happening right in front of our eyes and stand up for truth and say, you know what, we actually want to do the right thing for our citizens, our nationals, our residents, the people that are here that choose to call Texas home. We want to enable an identity system where they actually own their own identity. So it's not like everything that you own, all your data is just on a license plate. Or so, for instance, and here's a license plate there. Here's an example of another one. So this is a particular one out of Texas. And so when you actually scan these QR codes, they really go to pages that actually go through the details of what is actually this vehicle consists of. Is it insured? Is it stolen? Is it registered? Is it financed? Who are the owners? Who can drive it? Without providing any of these details. So without providing the last name. But if a driver's driving it and they can see, for instance, how many of us on this call literally use Lyft or Uber or Airbnb, where you don't know who's staying in your house, you don't know who's driving in your car, you don't know whose car you're getting into, but you know their first name and you know their license plate number and you know that someone's going to get paid, right? So there's an element of trust and verification, but you don't need to know all the details. So it's a matter of how does the digital world respect an individual's privacy and right to travel? Well, I believe here in the very short period, not only will it be, shutting off like what we saw in Nigeria, when people didn't link their physical ID with their payments and their phones, the government said shut off the cell phone numbers if they haven't done it. Like the cell service stops. You're seeing this in other environments, and usually when it starts getting rolled out by mass, you'll see it in small pockets. We've seen it in Australia. We've seen it in New Zealand. We've seen it in Canada. We've seen it in Israel. We're seeing it in Ukraine. We saw it in Ukraine even before the war started. So the point that I'm trying to make is, how can systems actually provide governments with the tools and technologies for an individual to actually be private and not centrally controlled? And that is what is being built for the last 15 years within these clear companies to enable this digital world to be able to stand up, and then countries or states to be able to offer these types of services to their actual nationals or citizens. What's interesting in the state of Texas is they're also lighting up a new stock exchange. I personally believe Texas is the new New York. It's the new San Francisco. It will literally be the new financial district for the United States of America if it stays within the United States of America. Whole nother conversation, but the technology that we're talking about, I personally believe will do three things. It will manage all equities, all currencies, and all commodities. So commodities, equities, currencies, all in one system that can literally be interchanged at real time. And I believe at no fees, like 5 to 8 seconds, full settlement, and it will revolutionize how humanity is actually doing transactions. And it can be done based upon a simple scan. And for those of you that have used it before, you understand how very real this is. But what I want to show you is some of the things that are actually true and dear. So by the way, for those that have not seen, this is a Clear phone, but you don't need a Clear phone. Anybody can grab this off of Apple or Google. These are all Clear-based apps. So these apps particularly have a decentralized derived key that manages just my data, and I'm the only one that can get into it with my fingerprint. And some of the stuff we're doing will actually take it further from the finger also to another thing that you may have. For instance, what is it that I personally have here? Well, I've got some cards in my pocket. All right, so I'll just pull open a card. Okay, so I've got a card, I've got an ID. Let's say I've got an ID, I've got a card, I've got a phone. What else do I have? I've got a ring. What if that fingerprint, a ring, and all of this stuff were all to come together and actually work together? But today, what I'm going to show you is actually 5-factor authentication that's not doing some of those other elements. but this is the most secure login and system that you'll ever see. I'm going to do two things. One, I'm not going to log in, but I'm going to vote. Okay, so this is talking about voting. So let's say I want to ask a question. Is the sky blue? Yes or no, right? And it ends, by the way, here in a couple days. So I'm going to say, no, it actually looks white in here. So I'm going to pull this open. It's going to use derived keys. By the way, you can manage family members depending on timeframes and things. So I'm just going to go ahead and click. Oops, I scanned it from the other system. I was screaming on another, anyways. So you'll be able to see those things change in real time. Now, let's say I want to actually go and vote for, I really love this guy here. So let's say I know that nobody's voted for him. So I'm going to go and, I'm not even going to show you all the other candidates. I'm just going to go ahead and say, I want to actually vote for this guy for president. And I'm not saying negative things. I'm just showing you how this works. So you can see that my vote counted there. And let's back up even further and say, I won't even talk about Texas secession because this is not the right form. I'm going to say no. Let's not adopt a monetary system that's actually backed by something. And so I'm providing my voice on 3 different subjects that can actually be cryptographically registered in real time. And let's say that I actually talk to somebody and it hasn't expired. So you can see this actually goes until the 20th. I can actually change it. And every single time that I'm going through the process of doing this, it will literally enable technology to actually cryptographically link to my profile. By the way, people don't know what my profile is. They don't. So you can see that I just moved it back and forth. Once that date expires, it's done and it's locked in. But let's go ahead and do something different. Let's log into a system. So I was showing you how people could do it without even being logged in. I'm going to do it once I log in. So again, 5-factor verification, something I have, something I do, something I am, something in a certain space and time that literally logs me in with no username and passwords. And then I can go and create things. Like this is within the Hawaiian country. Let's say I want a license plate like this. Can someone give me a license plate number to a real vehicle and then let me know what state it's in? Anybody? I know I'm putting you on the spot. If you get it, let me know. But it does much more than just vehicle registrations or certifications for birth, adoption, marriage, or councils. Let's say that you want a system that actually governs itself. So there's no kings, there's no presidents, there's no rulers. It's everyone actually has a voice because technology can enable that voice to be transparent and heard and realized without dispute. I mean, what's going to happen right now? We think the last election in the United States of America or in Canada or in New Zealand was corrupt. It's what we're going to see here in the next future, in the next 10 months is just going to be a joke. You already know that it is, but let's say there's a dispute and you want to question things. Let's say that you want to register certain things, or let's say you want to start a business. Let's say literally you want to just start a business. Let's say you want to create a corporation that has, and in Wyoming, they've already authorized this from a federal standpoint and a state standpoint, fully approved. I was actually there the night that it was approved. So you can see, and every time you actually scan, so when I'm scanning, what's happening behind the scenes is there's derived keys that's tied to my identity that I can verify. So I'm going to say, so it's just this simple, like, let's see if I've got, I literally just created a company that literally has members. So you can see me as a member. I can invite other members, and it can do multi-signature for assets that they create. It's got a reputation, or the reputation is not very good because it was just created. I can manage things. I can add other assets to it, etc. Or I can see what the rest of the world is going to see. So literally, you can see a derived key. You can see the members, you can see the assets, you can see bylaws, certificates, polls, questions. If they had their own questions, you could literally see them here. If I wanted to know who actually registered it, so this is actually me within the digital ecosystem of the Texan country. So if people actually wanted to see who I was, asked to see my last name, they would scan this. It would send them a request, and it would automatically open it up. Now, what's interesting is how people don't have to be in the system. For instance, an officer doesn't have to sign up to be in the system, but they can request to see who the individual is. And it's up to them to do their job to verify that the systems are actually here. I'll go and I can't show you here, but what I can show you here is I'm going to log in with the same credentials. So I'm going to a different jurisdiction and logging in to the Hawaiian Kingdom. And in the Hawaiian Kingdom, remember how I wanted to fill out a vehicle? Let's just jump into this guy here. So imagine if a company like Tesla were to say, or maybe Toyota would actually care about people's privacy, and they would give them their own recordings for the surveillance of these vehicles that are being mandated by law. If you haven't been paying attention in the last 12 months, not only are vehicle manufacturers forced and mandated by 2025 to put kill switches in their vehicles, but they also have to have internal and external surveillance. The question is, who owns that data? Imagine if Toyota, maybe Tesla, were to actually pop that data into the individual's data. So it's like, how can people securely store their data? Or let's say I want to see the license plate for this particular vehicle. Now, any of you can literally scan that license plate and see the details around it. Now, the derived key is actually this key right here, okay? And the last 6 digits of it are here. And notice the jurisdiction here, and then notice that it's non-expiring. This is what these plates would look like. Just like this for those that are looking at it. So literally, the physical world meets the digital world, and an environment like the Pacific Union versus the European Union enforces the human rights around privacy and the right to travel. If you're understanding the importance of what this really means, it's the future for humanity. It's the future for the new millennium around how we'll not only identify ourselves, but how we'll actually transact, how we'll have voices, how we will all be heard in a cryptographic way. I mean, people can go in and just say, I vote for this, and this is my signature, and I'm a citizen. And if they're really not, and they're supposed to be, back in the days, it's like, oh, that's a felony. You can't do that. That's not right. And the point is none of those things are being adhered to. And if you don't believe me, just keep your eyes open over the next 5 months and you'll see it. So this is an environment that is massively important. And what we're going to talk about next is even the next step. So again, to reiterate, we talked about countries coming together, kingdoms coming together, recognizing one another with real, not just treaties, but real action behind it. Because when you look at what the European Union did, it took 7 countries together back in the Second World War that now, fast forward, is 27 countries. And what did they do? They basically built GDRP, which is taking hundreds of millions of dollars from companies, churches, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Marriott, you name it. They're taking 5% of any of the revenues if they're not governing or managing the way that they get consent. Well, the Pacific Union is going to do something very simple, super simple. Will you actually accept an identity that is decentralized? So what that means is, let's say within the Hawaiian Kingdom, actually, let's jump into something. Let's say here, any of these IDs, would you take a vehicle registration that's decentralized? Would you take a plate that is decentralized? And what's beautiful is I met with an association for the sheriffs in the United States of America, and they're all over this. The police, I can't say they're all over this. Police come from a little different perspective and jurisdiction, but the sheriffs understand what freedoms and rights and accountability and responsibility is. As a matter of fact, today, and I would ask you to ask yourself, how many times have you seen an interaction with an officer where the officer says, you need to identify yourself, but they're not willing to identify, yet they're the public servants? It's time to turn those tables where the individuals actually are truly free. And I'm not saying that people can just do things and they don't have accountability or responsibility to it. But when we look at identity as a human right is a massive, massive important topic. So we're going to fast forward. It's not just oceanic, the Pacific Union, the Hawaiian Kingdom, or a nation possibly with the Texas or the state of Texas, but it's going to jump into something even bigger. America. America. Imagine American life where every single American can actually have their voice heard, where you can vote and you know where the individual physically is when they vote. Literally. When identity is actually managed by the individual, when they want to make a commitment to a significant other, like in Utah, there's been over 35,000 digital cryptographic marriages online over the last 5 years. 35,000 of them. Why is it that people are committing to one another, not under God, but under a government? I would ask that question. The next side of it is around assets. So it's not just a truck or a weapon, or it's literally all of our assets, finances, currencies. And it's not just it's a system that can go from one Android device to a Clear device, to an Apple device, to a laptop, all of it. You have all of your assets in one place, and you're the only one that can actually manage them. And it's not just, can you manage your children when they're young, but can your children manage you when you're old? And can your assets stay in the life cycle of the hard work that you've basically earned versus giving it to some state through some probate process when you take your last breath? So here's an example of the voting system on this side of it. Let's just say that these are the types of votes. I'm not going to say one is right or wrong. I don't think that's my role at all. But I'm showing you how an actual vote would actually be portrayed. So again, super simple. I just launched an app. Validated here, validated there. I guess I'd already voted for him. So you can actually see, you'll see it when you vote for multiple, because you can only do it once. You can't, it's like a foolproof system. You can't hide from it per se. Let's see if this one's, yeah, so there, dropped down to 14. So the point that I'm trying to drive at is it's very important to provide systems that we can all use, we can all get along with, and whether that's, to work together, to communicate together, to deliver different services. And some people are, we're going to tax our population. Some people are, we're not going to tax it. Some people are, we're going to actually have an automated forensic systems and manage reputation. The reality is these things are coming, whether we like it or not. Reputation score online, you've already had it. You just haven't been able to manage it with FICO, Suda Huda Puda, TransUnion, Equifax, Experian, and the next ones are going to be even further overreaching. So I would just throw that out there, and then I'll play this quick video. This goes through some very interesting approach and perspective, basically from when we look at life when we're under a government or whether we're under God. And this is not about religion. This is not about politics. This is about individuals having voice to be able to stand up for something that the founding fathers, particularly in this jurisdiction, the founding fathers of America actually, and I think they would absolutely be turning over their grave if they saw like what's happening with the debates, or what's happening with the border, or what's happening with elections, or what's happening with just general respect, humanity for humanity. So I'm going to play this real simple video, which was very telling to me, and I hope it is to you as well. And actually, I'm going to do it from a different player because some of our audience won't be able to hear it there. Why? Welcome to Chrome and some of the rights, but we'll start it right here. Start that again there.
The Wizard of Oz, what it really means. This appears to be a message to expose the banking cartel in America, and to let the people know that they have the power to liquidate them, and get back to Kansas, the real land and republic. The Wizard of Oz, written by L. Frank Baum, is not just a mere story. What is Oz a symbol for? Ounces. What is measured in ounces? Gold. What is the yellow brick road? bricks or ingot bars of gold. The character known as the straw man represents that fictitious, all caps, legal fiction, a person the federal US government created with the same spelling as your birth name. Remember what the straw man wanted from the Wizard of Oz? A brain? No juristic person, legal fiction, paper corporation has a brain because he or she has no breath of life. What did the straw man get in place of a brain? A certificate, a birth certificate for a new legal creation. He was proud of his new legal status, and all the other legalisms he was granted. Now he becomes the epitome of the brainless sack of straw who was given a certificate in place of a grain of common sense. Now, what about the Tin Man? Does taxpayer identification number, TIN, bring anything to mind? The poor Tin Man just stood there, mindlessly doing his work until his body literally seized up and stopped functioning. He worked himself to death because he had no heart or soul. He's the heartless and emotionless creature, robotically carrying out his daily task as though he were already dead. He's the ox pulling the plow and the mule toiling under the yoke. These days, his taskmasters just oil him nightly with beer and place him in front of a hypnotic television until his very existence no longer has any meaning or value. His masters keep him cold on the outside and heartless on the inside in order to control any emotion or feeling that might arise. The Cowardly Lion was always too frightened to stand up for himself. Of course, he was a bully and a big mouth when it came to picking on those smaller than him. Have you ever noticed how bullies are really the biggest cowards? They act as though they have great courage, but, in reality, have none at all. They roar, but with no teeth of authority to back them up. When push came to shove, the Cowardly Lion always buckled and whimpered when anyone of any size or stature challenged him. He wanted courage from the Grand Wizard, so he was awarded a medal of official recognition. Now, although remaining a coward, his official status allowed him to be a bully, but with officially recognized authority, and not at all unlike the attorneys, who hide behind the courts. What about the trip through the field of poppies? Did you notice how this had no narcotic effect on the straw man who had no brain, or the Tin Man with no heart or soul? They weren't real people, so drugs could not influence them. The Wizard of Oz was written at the turn of the century, so how could the author have known America was going to be drugged? The Crown has been playing the drug cartel game for centuries. Just look up the history of Hong Kong and the Opium Wars. The Crown already had valuable experience conquering all of China with drugs, so why not the rest of the world? What was the Emerald City? The Federal Reserve System. Who finally exposed Wizard for what he really was. Toto, the cute and somewhat annoying little dog. Toto means in total, or all together in Latin. What was it that the witch wanted after she alleged that the little dog had bitten her? Toto, or everything. Notice how Toto was not scared of the great wizard's theatrics, yet he was so small in size, compared to the wizard, that no one seemed to notice him. The smoke, flames, and holographic images of Oz were designed to frighten people into doing as the great wizard commanded. But Toto simply padded over, started barking until others paid attention to him and came to see what the barking was about. Who was behind the curtain? Just an ordinary person controlling the levers that created the illusion of the great wizard's power and authority. When Toto pulled back the curtain and completely exposed him, the charade was at an end. The veil hiding the corporate legal fiction and its false courts was removed. The wizard's game was up, and what was he after all? A con man, a fraud. We can see, in this tale, just how loud the bark from a little dog can be. Most of us remain silent and wait to be given whatever food and recognition, if any, by our legal masters. Let us not forget those flying monkeys. What perfect mythical creatures to represent the Bar Association attorneys, who attack and control the little people for the great crown wizard, the powerful and grand bankers of Oz. How, finally, was the evil witch destroyed? Pure, clean water? Liquidation. How did Dorothy finally get home? She simply clicked her heels. She always had the power, and so do we. What would it take to expose the wizard for what he is? We each need only a brain, a heart and soul, and courage. Then, and perhaps of the greatest importance, we need to learn how to work together. Only by working together can we have the freedom that was given to us all under the law of God.
I hope you enjoyed that as I did. It says so much with saying so little. So we'll go ahead and take any kind of questions, thoughts, feedback, interactions. It comes back to, are we going to be silent? Are we going to unite? It's our choice in what we actually buy, where it's from, where it's made, where we purchase it, what we purchase it with. We literally have an opportunity to change humanity for future generations, to free them from the slavery and bondage that's right in front of them. So I'll stop blabbing, but we've covered a lot of topics. There's a lot that's happened since over this 4th of July week, and I just wanted to let everyone not just know about it, but also have involvement in it. So if you have feedback, now's your time. If you have thoughts, if there's anything you want us to dig into, go for it.
I have a question.
I raised my hand, but I'm just going to go for it first, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I have to jump off soon. But so with the Hawaiian Life, so do you think by 2026, would have a whole system that could be, I guess, kind of showcased to the Australian government, so we can apply for some type of approval? I'm pretty sure by 20, they're going to be looking for types of innovation to be approved with crypto software.
So I would hope that by 2026, a lot of this is massive standards. When we look at some of these, the parts and regions, what's sad is out of the 26 countries, Australia wasn't one of them. But really the question goes to the Hawaiian Kingdom. Are they willing to actually get active and start pushing? I can tell you, and this is an interesting topic that you bring up, within the last 3 weeks, folks from Australia have actually reached out, and they've already got 400 people that are already on board with a system that they're looking to interface into this. So it's already happening. There's already an agreement in play, literally. There's already full-on proposals and agreements and budgets and timelines, and it's not done yet. Right. But
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah.
I saw some of the frameworks, and it was positive for me. I guess because I pitched on the Hyperledger, and I spoke to some people through the network to try and get them to understand, because I do think it's an education. Like I'm saying, it's an education thing, just to get them to understand that this is adding value to our current systems. Actually, not adding value, but multiplying it at a mass scale. So that's good to know. Thank you.
That's exactly right. And that's a really, it would be amazing to see Hawaii and Australia linking up together, recognizing one another together. So, Mr. T.
Hey, good morning here. I'm at the convention center working today and sneaking around with my headsets on, listening to our call this morning. I'm just doing a quick show of the exhibition halls and the Griffith University stand. I'm excited to hear that there's some connection with people in Australia, and I'd be keen to learn who that is and connect with them if possible.
I'm happy to put you in the middle of it. So you just let us know when, okay?
Will do. I'll finish work today and I'll message you tonight.
Done. Thank you so much. Jennifer, I know that you had wanted something to say something earlier. You're welcome to it. Go for it.
Yes. Sorry. I'm sure you're not surprised. I just have a question. For shopping, have you talked to Public Square?
No.
Okay.
You think there's a good
We'll
fit
work on
there?
that. Yeah, for sure. We'll get a meeting with the CEO.
Okay. What do you think
Yep,
about
that
all
was
this?
my only question.
What do you think about all this stuff, Jennifer? What do you think about what you're seeing, what you're observing?
Well, I think this is definitely where every state should be going. And I think we will see a big shift. Once we get Texas and a few others, then I think it'll definitely become the new norm. It's changing the paradigm, right? And I think the security alone is the number one seller, because that's everybody's fear. Every time I hear, every committee hearing I've ever sat in DC and in Texas, that's one of the number one issues, right? Is our data being sold? Is the security, cyber? It's such an issue. People's houses getting stolen through title fraud and whatnot. So I think that this is a really good solution for that. And I'm excited. I'm excited about it.
That's awesome. Thank you for your help to being a part of the voices that actually make this become a reality. Like at the end of that video, I don't know if you heard that, but it's just us just doing something. We just have to do it,
Right.
So thank you.
Right. That's what it takes is us just taking a stand and, saying no more. And I think more and more people are doing that now, and it'll keep happening, especially up until November and after.
Exactly. So Susan said something about Public Square, and so I look forward to following up on that. Thank you for your time. And when you've got some of the meetings locked with the Attorney General and some of the CIO and CTO, we'll make that a priority and make that happen. Other questions and thoughts? I'm specifically looking for something from Mr. Jeffrey. Jeffrey, help me as an individual to have open eyes when it talks about the history. And I think this man has forgotten more than most people know when it comes to this topic. And I would love to have any of his feedback. This is the first time we've seen it. I haven't even talked to him for years, but Jeffrey, thoughts, feedback?
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted and you're live. Everybody can hear you. You're streaming.
Okay, I think, from the conversations that you and I have had previously, I'm skeptical of anything that involves a conversation with government. I'm being someone as considered an OG in Bitcoin, since my involvement with Bitcoin began in 2009, and I've never sold one. Has been not just as a financial play, but more importantly as a philosophical play. And what's the philosophical play about the type of world I want to live in? And I want to live in a world, if you think about what are the values embedded in Bitcoin, and these were values embedded in Bitcoin by choice. So when Satoshi was, and I think Satoshi's on this call, it seems to be. So from what I saw, somebody entered the call with a username Satoshi. So Satoshi can correct me if I'm wrong. But the values embedded in a completely decentralized system where there is no governing authority, which is the case of Bitcoin. It was never a project. It was never an initial coin offering. There were no pre-mined coins, and it was designed, to be anti-fragile with respect to the government. And you had to figure out how do you design something that can be completely anti-fragile to the government, which is designing something that doesn't require the permission of the government. Because once you're cooperating with the government, you're a captive of the government. I just one of my colleagues just sent me a few hours ago a post that she saw on Twitter from I think a law professor about a court ruling in I don't know what district court. I think it was in Virginia, where basically the government went to Google and said, you do geofencing, we want to locate these hours, some people, and they caught this person. And then the court ruled that the government's request to Google regarding this information, regarding this individual and their locations, the court ruled was not actually a search. So there's no violation of the Fourth Amendment because the government asked for information. Google provided the information. The person is in jail. At the time the information was provided, there was no probable cause. And the court said this is not a search. So, I think this is what happens when, any platform has to answer to government. So if it requires government permission, to me, it's a problem. I don't want to cooperate with government. I don't want government permission. I don't want to talk to anybody in government. Fortunately, the way, BitChute, is operated and why I'm involved is because it's a permissionless platform. So that's why we're not in an app store. I'm not asking Apple for permission. I'm not asking for Google for permission.
So for those
I
that are,
already had that experience. I already had that experience with Parler. Not a pleasant experience. I know that there are rules. Their rules are if you want to have an app on our store, you got to be part of the surveillance state. So once you have an app, you're part of the surveillance state. So there's no way of avoiding it. And one day if you don't cooperate, you're off the store. It's just that simple. And what I told Parler, and people have to learn to listen, I got involved in the beginning of 2020 with Parler. In the beginning, it had almost no engagement, okay? It was getting about, it had only a few thousand, daily active users, maybe only a few hundred daily active users. At the time Parler got removed, it had 8 million daily active users. It was the most downloaded app in the world.
I want
to
say something, Jeff.
Or anything like that. The experience is that when you're small and you're not big, nobody pays attention to you. And when you really scale, then people pay attention to you. And then so you don't know what the threat you are until you scale. And I told this to Parler when I first came in. I said, get off Amazon, and one day Apple and Google will kick us off. I said it the day I gave money to them. I said, this is what's going to happen. So I said, focus on the web-based, focus on building a censorship-resistant, permissionless ecosystem that's anti-fragile. Satoshi thought this through, okay? Satoshi thought through all the angles of attack to make Bitcoin, resilient to every point of attack. What happens if Ethereum is deemed a security? Gensler has already said, they're going to look into that, and Ethereum probably is a security. And if it's deemed a security and it's not a security, if the government can come in and say, gee, you did a transaction, there's some terrorists there, reverse it, or we're going to remove your license, Ethereum will remove it, or they'll lose their license and nobody can trade Ethereum anymore. So that's not going to happen with Bitcoin. So I think my interest is in systems that you don't need to speak to anybody in government. That's my preference. I don't want to cooperate with government. I want to. There was a. If you look at some of the writings of some of the Supreme Court justices who were real civil libertarians, what they talked about is where does freedom begin? Freedom began with the individual's right and expectation to be left alone, okay? Once you no longer have a right or expectation of being left alone, okay, you've surrendered freedom. So when you're talking about dealing with states, this is the one thing about, that concerns me, and I would have to know a lot more, about from the presentation, you're having a more deeper conversation, but that's my concern. I don't want to talk with platforms like Public Square. No offense to that. They also are in the data mining business. So none of these places are really preserving privacy. none of them really believe in data sovereignty. So none of them are really treating the data as if it's your personal property, which should be the case.
Yeah.
So they all have nice slogans. The problem is every True Social, Rumble, whatever, they all say they're free speech platform, but then look at their terms of service. So so people market and they say anything when they market it. The question is, are the attributes consistent with the propaganda? So my experience in the experience that I've gotten exposed to being involved in Parler, because basically for me, my story is basically I opted out. I mean, I lived off the grid for many years. So until I got in Parler, I just was a guy who was accumulating gold and accumulating Bitcoin and leaving the world alone and having the world leave me alone. So then I decided to do something on behalf of free speech. It became a cause for me, and it still is a cause for me. And because if we're not free to speak, we're not free to think. And if we're not free to speak and we're not free to think, we'll never live in a free society. And if we don't fight back with respect to this, propaganda that the greatest threat is misinformation and disinformation, and free speech is destroying our freedom and destroying our democracy. If people don't really fight back on that, and look to figure out how I can cooperate, with the government so I can get a nice license and everybody loves me and I can make some money, I think that's a real problem. And with respect to decentralization, a lot of the problem with that is securities laws. I mean, I gave a talk. I was invited to speak about this from Rand Paul. I was in his office. He invited some people over. I gave a talk, and I was talking about, let me describe to you like a really decentralized Uber, okay? That how you can decentralize every business and why it's impossible to have a decentralized Uber right now. And the problem is this Securities Exchange Act of 1933. So that if I wanted to go out, if I wanted to get a whole bunch of quote gig workers, and I wanted to convert them into not employees, but third parties who I pay them in a token, as a reward for their job, because they'd rather have token than fiat, okay? And because they like to have the appreciation potential in the token that they don't have in the fiat, and will prefer that form of expression of compensation. I can't do that. There's no way for me to give value, okay, to a third party in return for their work. If they're an investor, and they put up money and there's this contract and whatever, but outside of that, you just can't really say, well, gig workers can come in and out. They can put as much effort as they want in for that. Their reward is the tokens. And then if they want to trade those tokens on an exchange because they want to pay their rent or pay some other things, and people won't accept the token as a form of payment, that at least they can convert it into a form of payment that could be used for payments. But if you take a look at like M2, which is what most people use as the definition of money, okay, 18% to 25% of M2 is M1, and M1 is transaction balances. So about 80% of M2 is savings money, not spending money. So the greatest use of money is not for savings, is not for spending, it's savings. So I think there's a lot of confusion about this. So I think this is the kind of the future. I could imagine if somebody goes out and says, I want to do, Mission Impossible 12, okay? And instead of, going to movie studios and going to people to raise money, Tom Cruise went around to people and said, you're going to be the gaffer, the director, and this and that, and I'm going to give you a Mission Impossible token, okay? And so people contribute their human capital in return for a Mission Impossible token. Now they have upside. Now they said, I love this project, and I want to establish equity in the project and not just get paid, a small salary, because I want to capture value and not just cash flow. I want to claim against its value. So then you don't need to, and no one needs to raise money for anything. If they can do a project that people say, I will contribute my human capital, just like how people mine Bitcoin. People spend money to buy Bitcoin because they think whatever money they spend to earn a Bitcoin, that the Bitcoin is worth more than the investment to produce that Bitcoin. So it's the same thing. I go and I put my human capital in. I get paid a token. It's something I believe in because I'm betting on it. I got skin in the game. So everybody's incentives are well aligned. And to the extent that I need to pay my rent or I need to pay something, then then I go out and I say, gee, you know what? I go to my friends and I say, do you want to own a piece of Mission Impossible 12? Get a piece for me, and I'll sell you part of my piece for money, and then I will go use that money to pay for my rent or my mortgage or some other payments. And then you democratize the process of who then people go to the movies and say, gee, you know what? I own a piece of that movie. Then they'll feel better that when they go and buy the popcorn and stuff like that, that they're not spending money to be in the movie. They're investing in something they're getting a return on. And rather than just being a consumer, they're a producer and building equity. So the reality, we have a structure of a society where only few people can build equity. And the system is designed so that only a few people can build equity. So my interest is in a system where more and more people can build equity. If you look at businesses today, they have very valuable franchises that produce very little cash flow, and many of them lose money, and they lose a lot of money. So they only can stay in business if they can keep convincing somebody on a subsequent round that their business is worth more than they did the last round. And maybe one day that disappears, and then all the people earning that money will find that they'll be out of a job, and the people who got the benefit of the upside, were a few of the insiders and nobody else, and everybody else who worked hard will walk away with nothing. So, I want to try and live in an ownership society where everybody has incentive alignment because everybody's got skin in the game, and hopefully people will develop decentralized exchanges where people will be indifferent to whatever form of payment that they accept. So, I mean, that's the world I want to be involved in.
Jeffrey, and I don't know if people really understand who this amazing man is, but he not only funded some of the original, for instance, Parler, you heard him mention that, or Gab or BitChute, but he puts his energy and his effort behind the words that he's talking about. And I believe a lot of it comes from his knowledge and history of understanding the forefathers of America. And I really believe for me, I want to learn more around what our forefathers, what would they have done if they had technology like we have today?
If you think about you started this off, Michael, with a reference to last week it being the 248th anniversary of the publication, the signature publication of the Declaration of Independence. Well, if you notice that the conclusion of the Declaration of Independence, if people actually read it, which I think most people don't, what was the concluding paragraph on designing who was signing it? Free and independent states. Okay, it wasn't John Hancock as president of the Constitutional Convention signing on behalf of everyone. Right? That's what would happen today. One person come in, they got the power, and they're signing behalf of it because they're representing one organization. Okay, the reality is no one person had the authority to represent all the 13 states. They never conferred on any one person the authority to represent all 13 states. Each state had their representatives, and that representative signed on behalf of their state. So no one was empowered to sign on behalf of all their states because at the end of the day, they were agreeing was that they were free and independent states. And that's who signed the Declaration of Independence, free and independent states. Not John Hancock representing a United States of America, where he was signing on behalf of every single state, and every single state empowered him to speak on behalf of those states. People have to think about the details of why it was done the way it was, And when they had the Constitutional Convention, the whole idea of having a president was a controversial concept. There were drafts without a president. There was a draft with sort of like a board of directors, a triumvirate of people. So there was a lot of discussions and fears about what happens if you vest single too much authority. And basically some of the founders basically they said is the only time the president should really have unusual authority is when we're at war. Outside of that, the president should be pretty irrelevant. I always I in speeches that I used to give, I don't give them anymore. when I used to give speeches and I used to tell people what made the U.S. so exceptional is our system was so well designed that we could have a history of mediocre presidents and still be the greatest country in the world, because ultimately it didn't matter whether the president was good or not good, because the system that was designed was a decentralized system so that things did not, think about the failure we have today. When we talk about today that this election is so important, depending upon who wins and who loses, you know, and the future of the country is a function of who sits in the White House, that's anyone who believes that is anyone who believes that has accepted a philosophy antithetical to our founding documents, okay?
Right.
So they didn't design a system that said the country fails if we choose the wrong president, okay? Anyone that has that mentality does not believe in the foundational principles. They don't, okay? So people like me, I don't give a shit. Who's, you know, they're all, my prediction is always simple. Whoever wins, I lose, okay? Government is gonna grow, the deficit is gonna grow, the surveillance state will grow, okay? And the country will keep moving towards bankruptcy. So, you know, whoever wins the White House, that's gonna happen. And anyone who thinks, I think is a delusional idiot. So, you know, so I'm indifferent to politics. I gotta figure out how I make my life as good as I can for myself and my family, and not give a shit about what happens in the state of Texas and in Washington D.C. You know, because they're all enemies of freedom, and none of them find any use whatsoever for the Constitution. None of them believe in those documents. None of them believe in it. Okay, because there's no evidence that anything they do is consistent with. Because we just had the issue of the impeachment. Okay, find me in the text. Do you think the founders did not understand that? I mean, with respect to the prosecution and immunity, do you think they didn't understand that term? Okay, so there's no mention of immunity for the president. There was a limited. There was a limited immunity for Congress, because ultimately they thought the legislature would be the strongest body, not the executive. So there was some limited immunity. There was limited immunity for the Congress that's in the Constitution, you know. And when they had the discussion, you know, there was no agreement to provide any immunity in the Constitution for the president, none whatsoever. Whether it's an official act or unofficial act, these are all fictions. These are all things made up. Okay, so this is what we do. We make things up. We make up stories because we like the way they sound.
Mhm.
So do people, you know, I don't find many people true lovers of liberty. I know people who like to wave a flag and use those words, but at the end of the day, you know, do they really believe in it? No, I don't think there are many people, you know, who actually do. So, you know, that's from the limited experience I've had post my Parler time, meeting with a lot of people, because when Parler was scaled, a lot of people would contact me and say, how do I become part of Parler? Can I get an equity piece? Can you give me the same deal that you gave Dan Bongino, and all that type of stuff? So all these you know, big names were talking to me for a short period of time, because they all were excited about what was happening, and they all wanted a piece. How many of them do I think were really true believers in free speech? I can tell you zero, none, not one. They have conversations with me, or what about Nazi content, or what about this content, or what about that content? I said, I thought you looked like the free speech platform. I said, we're not embracing this content, we're not endorsing the content. And the good thing about this content is, if I show you the content that exists on the platform and then show you the engagement, the most horrible content, most of it probably comes from saboteurs, of people coming in trying to destroy Parler. So they put the content up, you know, then they disappear, but they circulate the content and they show it to Apple, and they show it to Google, and they show it to Amazon, and they show it to the New York Times, they show it to the Washington Post, you know, so they're just looking to sabotage the platform. But I always just tell everybody, here's the good news. The good news is nobody's paying attention to the content. So if you look at this engagement, the engagement is close to zero. So it's not that a project exist, but how can you find anything a threat to our society by some loser puts up some content that 99.9% of the population don't want any relationship with?
Yeah.
That means to some extent we, as a society, is the fact that most people, normal people, don't want to engage in content that is clearly, antisocial and hateful and is not designed to serve any constructive purpose. So, but still, people were bothered by it. Why? Because they say they believe in free speech, but that's just a way of virtue signaling them that they're supposedly a freedom lover, but they're the same type of virtue signaling that the other side does on other issues.
Yeah.
So, my interest in people who are the real deal, with respect to that, and people are the real deal, they don't really care about the elections, before, I say 1913, which is I say the year that the Constitution was shredded. And why do I say that? 1913 was the year we got the Fed. 1930 was the year we got the income tax. The reason we got the income tax was the government had the revenues to back up its commitment it had to bail out banks. The government had to function as a lender of last resort. You can't be a lender of last resort if you have no money. So you have to have money to be a lender of last resort. So if the banks go bad, you got to tax the people to bail out the banks. So that's why we got an income tax. And they also wanted to go to war. Okay. So we needed a warfare state, so we had to have taxes to go to war. And we had the taxes because we gotta fund the banksters. Okay. So we got the income tax, we got the Fed, and the other thing we got was direct election of senators. So instead of the states having the authority to make sure the senators represented the states, now, if you think about it, if you look at elections, they're national elections, state elections. Money comes in from all over the country. People care who the senator was, and if it was a senator up to 1913, that wasn't the case because the senator was accountable to the state legislature. So the senator cared about making the residents of that state happy, and they were accountable to the legislature of that state. So we had a decentralized system, and we decided to decentralize it by letting the government raise a lot of money, having the government control the printing of money, okay, and having the Senate become more of a centralized authority than a decentralized body. So that's 1913. 1913 total government spending, federal, state, and local level, was about 4.5%, 5%. 4.5%, 5%. That's what it was in 1913. 4.5%, 5%. Jefferson, when federal government spending was 2% of GDP, he thought that was too much. Now we have government spending at over 45% of GDP. So government is half the economy directly. Now we think about how the government influences the economy indirectly. Well, the average person is a non-accredited investor. So the average person is a non-accredited investor, which is like 95% of the people. What they can do? They can buy a mutual fund, or they put their money in the bank, and the bank buys government securities, or mortgage securities with that money. So, which are also government guaranteed instruments. So, if we think about how capital is allocated in the process, the free market works for 1.5% to 2% of the population. There is no free market for the rest of society. So they can't accumulate wealth, and they don't participate in the free market. So I see very little conversation about how we really expand the free market to most people.
Yeah.
So how we get people to actually accumulate wealth, when we live in a society where 1/3 of it lives paycheck to paycheck, and we'll see what happens when Social Security and Medicare goes broke in 9 or 10 years. And right now the commitment of both parties is to do nothing. So, we have so many problems, and what's going to be the answer to that? The answer to that is the government already knows. The government is going to become more onerous in its surveillance of people because the need to control us will be greater because they understand that eventually interest rates will rise because the government can't finance the debt. Nobody wants to buy our bonds anymore. So the dollar as a reserve currency of the world will continue to erode slowly, and then the question is, what is government going to do to preserve its power, in 10, 20 years? People have to think ahead, not just today. You gotta be forward looking. That's what markets are, forward looking. So you gotta be forward looking. And so, so my interest is, with at least my own activities, with the limited time I have left on this, on this planet, I'm 69, I'm not a young guy, is focusing on, how much freedom I leave to my daughter and my grandchildren.
Jeffrey, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the stand for so many years on what you've done. I've really appreciated the opportunity to just show it to you in a glimpse. I know there's a lot more depth that we can review one-on-one, but maybe next week we take some time and go through that, because I know this was the first time you've really seen it I think you've seen it, pieces of it, probably a year, maybe 2 years ago. But thank you for
Yeah, and
being here.
one-on-one, I have a lot of questions from what I've seen, so
Yeah.
we can go one-on-one. Now is not the right forum for me to be asking.
Yeah, we'll
my
dig into some of
personal
those
questions.
and allow other folks sometimes for questions. But thank you for being here, and I'll follow up with you. Other thoughts, feedback, comments, concerns? I think some of the things we went over today, there should be all of those. There should be concerns. There should be excitement. There should be caution. There should be, Charles?
Hey, Jeffrey, that was wonderful, man. Loved it, every part of it. I like your forehead too, by the way. Mike's got too much hair in his head. And there's so much truth to the things that you're talking about, Mike. What you're talking about, Mike, I'll have to share with you a Facebook post that I just went through on this exact same topic, and like crazy. But thank you so much for what you shared, Jeffrey. I really appreciated that. I just wanted to say that. That's all.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, comments? If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. Thank you for your time and your attendance and for joining the journey as we've gone through it. I hope that humanity gives this a chance. And I know that there's a point where we'll push on the awareness and the adoption buttons. We haven't pushed on them just yet, but as the technology continues to get matured and stable, like we 26 countries in the last 2 years, and we've rolled out about 5 of them now, and there's 7 to be rolled out. So there's more coming. But this one in particular is a very special one to me as an American, and trying to understand what it's our responsibility. It's our fiduciary responsibility as Americans to understand what the Constitution was, what it is, and to not ignore it, and to build systems that can do real similar to what Jeffrey was talking about, where the individuals can actually prove who they are. They can have their own life without being egregiously overreached, and have control of systems that they don't feel like they're just an extension of an existing system, but they can actually be free. And I think the right words are they can have quiet enjoyment in their life. They can choose what they want to do as long as it's not hurting other people and it's respectful and kind, and the basics that we would all hope, do unto others as we'd have done unto us. But this Republic for the United States of America, I believe, is a very important step forward for humanity. This isn't the first time. There's other people that have said this and said that this needs to be done. As a matter of fact, the whole reason that we're even involved, there's a very big movement behind this, about 300,000 people on average per state throughout the United States. So that adds up to a good chunk, about 150 million people, 1.5 million. And I don't know what the total number is. I know that there's some adoption behind it, but we're grateful to be able to contribute our piece to it, to provide some technology that can actually help them to do more with less. And it'll be interesting to see how humans adopt it. The question that was asked earlier around the Hawaiian Kingdom, and I'll pull this other one up, around how Australia could actually interface with them, or how the Pacific Ocean or the Pacific Union can actually be pulling others together and collaborating. Well, it really comes down to the choices of the individuals. Do you care about privacy? Do you care about the ability to have your own assets and your own choice? I think as humans, we're born with a couple things: the genes that we're given at birth, the environment that we live in, and choice. And what's really neat is choice can actually change the environment and our genes. And so when we link all these things together, can we choose to be in a different jurisdiction? Let's fast forward and say that the things that are the United States of America is currently doing to the next generation, it's not just stealing them and robbing them blind of financial assets, because that's not where everything ends up. It's not about assets and money. It's about time. And they're telling them, if you're 18 to 26 years old, male or female, you're going to do X, Y, Z with the next war and with the next lists and being involved in the military. This hasn't happened since the Vietnam War. That's just on males. It's never happened with females. We talk about some of the things that are happening, but let's say that people actually had choice to choose a different environment. When I say environment, I'm talking jurisdiction of where they want to live and where they want to be domiciled. I was born an American and I'll die an American. But at the same time, I also understand that we live on one earth and we're one family. And I don't care what people say around God or spirit or creator or Elohim or Jehovah or Muhammad. I'm not talking religion here. I'm talking the basics of we are all one family, and we all are brothers and sisters and humans. And can we just respect that and then enable people, just like Jeffrey was talking about, there doesn't have to be the 1%ers. The secret combinations are real, but through making choices, we can all be one. So with that being said, we'll wrap up today's meeting. Again, today is July 9th, 2024.
Michael, can I ask you a question before the meeting wraps up?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay. I have a question about something that, I think potentially could have a lot of utility, which is your voting system. I don't know how scalable it is, but you made a point. I think one of the problems we'll have in governance going forward, post-Trump era is the fact is, that if he loses, it's a stolen election, and if he wins, the Democrats will say, voter repression.
Yeah.
So, and the reality is, there's probably a little bit of both of that.
Yeah.
There's probably areas. I don't know if people know the statistics in the 2000 election. When they did a state recount, which is what at one point Gore had asked for. When they finally did it several years later, because they had preserved the ballots for a period of time, Gore did actually win Florida. So in 2000, Gore actually won the presidential election, because when they did the recount, he won the state. So and actually, I guess using Trump's logic, Gore as vice president could have decertified Florida, and made himself president. And I guess the Republicans would have endorsed that, and John Eastman would have said, I'm okay with that, because that's what they want Trump to do. So, but at that year, even though blacks represented a much smaller percentage of voters than the white voters, when they went through and they disallowed ballots and the counting, and remember the Republicans controlled the state at that point in time. Kathleen Harris was the Secretary of State. There were about about 140, 150,000 black votes disallowed, ballots that they did not count, and there were under 30,000 white votes that they did count. So we never got to really see the criteria, of what was the reason for, so many votes, not being heard. In many states, the waiting time for voting districts that have minority districts are 45 minutes to an hour, and in the same state in white areas, the waiting time is 10 to 15 minutes. So is there really equal access to the ballot? So, I think we have a system that's so flawed, and when we had paper ballots, we still had dead people voting. We still would have many districts that ran out of paper ballots. So it's not like that's a perfect system either. So we might be at a point where, the other part, no one has ever deemed, half the people will believe whoever's president is illegitimate. So one thing is thinking whether you like that person or dislike that person. Another is whether they are legitimate or illegitimate. We used to accept the president as being illegitimate. Even if we didn't like them, they were legitimately had that office. They held that office legitimately. They might have been doing a good job or a bad job, but we didn't question the legitimacy of their occupancy of the White House. Now half the society might deem no president legitimate. And how do you have successful governance system, where no president is legitimate. And so the question is, how do we begin believing the votes again, where it's easy to vote, so it's easy for people to vote, it's easy to count and hard to cheat, and the type of system that, at least a little bit I showed here, I mean, might be one that you could promote for, states to adopt when they run their elections, so that that people don't, so that then the people know that it's easy for them to vote, and they'll trust the outcome, and there won't be so much litigation about the outcome. So if David Chaum designed, he's the one who did DigiCash, the first digital currency that predated, Bitcoin by almost 20 years. He's designed, cryptographic signatures also back in the 80s for a voting system. So I don't know, maybe one of the things you could do is get together with other, experts in this and design a voting system that people will trust, that people don't need to leave their houses and go anywhere to vote, that they'll just need a device, that they can vote from, and everybody will trust the result and will be able to count it quickly and have an answer quickly, and then nobody will doubt the answer to that.
Yep.
So and that's a project I would personally be very interested in, because at least there'd be less disputes. People can argue over other things. It's just one less thing that people would have to argue over.
What's interesting is I believe that the system that we just looked at, particularly for the American ecosystem with this American Live, I believe that this is actually one of the weakest capabilities when we look at what this can actually do. It's an important part of it, but the reputation side of it that's behind it, the individual gets a reputation. If they want to create a company, it can get a reputation. And if they want to be able to, as an asset, if the company creates an asset, they can do that as well. But when we dig into the actual reputation side of it, and this is why it's so important, there's some features and functions where the individual can say, now remember, we're talking about decentralized identity and decentralized reputation, where the individual has the choice on what they want to share, and the person that's actually, or organization that's looking at their reputation, can weight and measure it. So for instance, imagine a voting system where people can say, this is what I vote for, and it automatically knows, hey, are you actually in that region? Or it would know, have you been in that region? Or it would, so there's so much that you can do when you tie to a device that actually gives the individual's privacy first and doesn't disclose things that should not be disclosed, such as, for instance, and that's why we call this stuff life. When we look at these different systems, when we talk about this Life app, it's not just where you go, what you do, what apps you use, what messages you send, what phone calls you do, how you do transactions, what you buy. People don't need to know the details, but they need to know that's a human, not a machine. And what's gorgeous is you can only have one Life app on a system at a time. You can't have multiple Life apps. So you can't have, Clear Life or Samoan Life or Tuvalu Life or Fiji Life or Saudi Life or Hawaiian Life or American Life or Texan Life on one device more than once. You can only have one on a phone. So they would have to grab phones, prove who they are, prove where they go, all of this. And then when they actually cast their vote, they need to be in that region, or they need to prove that there's a remote voting process going on. Like I remember living in New Zealand and voting out of Oregon for a particular candidate. And my message was, how do I know that vote actually got counted? And who knows that it got counted? And how can we verify? You talk about Florida with Gore's, re-voting years later. And what blockchain can do. The power of what happens when a transaction is cemented and you have multiple validations worldwide that actually have this. And for those that have been watching us, we built operating systems that are 150 countries, 86 languages, and on multiple servers for 17 years. So the back end side of this thing is absolutely scalable in an environment that is violated. I believe that all data worldwide is violated. I believe that all systems worldwide, hardware and software, are violated. And the reason I would say that is at the CMOS layer of most of the silicon that's out there, the BIOS layer, the virtual machine layer, the operating system layers, there's backdoors. And that's just what it is. So when you dig into it and say, okay, well, if the operating systems and apps actually have data that's going out, how can I as an individual keep my identity and privacy and then operate in a futuristic world where I can actually benefit from it? And I care about my own data, not only my own data, but my assets, my vehicles, my home, my land. If they're thinking that they purchase those and they pass them to generation, we're talking about the most advanced asset management system and wealth management system in the world. And it goes to your point. It's not the small few that actually can do this. It's everyone. And it's real time, like overnight. I believe, kind of like what you did with Parler, where your users, that when you started, how many users did you work with when you originally started working with Parler? And then
Parler had, when I first got involved with Parler had 500,000 registered accounts, where about 425,000 were dormant. So there was like 50,000 active accounts.
50,000 active accounts, and you watch that puppy go to 80 million? How much?
20 million accounts and 8 million daily active users.
20 million accounts. So you went from 50,000 active to
from 50,000 somewhat active to 20 million accounts, of which 8 million were active on a daily basis. When Parler got taken down, the amount, if you break up by geography, Parler had about 1/3 the daily active users Twitter had in the U.S., not globally, but in the U.S. Parler had about what was 1/3 the size of Twitter actively. But Twitter, the people, when Parler got taken down, Twitter had Twitter, the user was spending 15, 16 minutes a day on Twitter. The average Parler user was spending about 32 to 35 minutes a day on Parler. So engagement for many accounts that had less followers on Parler than they had on Twitter had materially more engagement on Parler. I spoke to some content creators who told me they had 10 times the amount of followers on Twitter than they had on Parler, but they were getting 5 to 10 times the engagement on Parler they were getting on Twitter. And ultimately what they want is that engagement. So if they don't get engagement, they can't monetize it very much. So they really value a lot the engagement. And so they were finding that with less users, they were getting significantly more engagement. And this is not anecdotal. I spoke to a bunch of people and then I checked out, a bunch of people who had accounts on both platforms to see their engagement. And I took a random sample of a bunch of them and to see how much more engagement they had on Parler, and they were getting materially more engagement on Parler than they got on, than they got on Twitter. So, it had really scaled, and that's why it was destroyed.
I'm just going to throw something out there, and I know that you're not in the same circles anymore, but I'm going to throw out what we believe. So this is the X phone. And this actually has its own authentication system that does, imagine if X or Twitter had the authentication and identity systems of what we're talking about here, where it's not only just payments, but when you log in with the scan and you can validate it and you can have identity similar to what we're talking about with these different states and linking them all together. But it comes off of, well, most folks are already used to, when we look at Clear phones, there's different past models, which are all basically sold out, current models, which are basically almost all sold out, but future models, imagine the ability for an X phone, not just what we're seeing with Clear phones, but you tie to one of these social user bases, and it's not just the social user base that gets paid, but the user can actually get paid. And because of the systems that we're talking about here, where with Bitcoin, and I'll see if I can actually find a slide on this. With Bitcoin, it usually takes about 8 to 10 minutes for full settlement, which I totally agree that Bitcoin has a massive future around savings assets, kind of like what you talked about with M1, M2. But when you talk about running a financial system, people they won't wait around for that kind of transaction. That is just too slow when they look at it. So they're going to look at a transaction that has to be rapid. And when I mean rapid, I'm talking.
Gresham's law says you hold good money and you spend shitty money. So the best form of money is Bitcoin. So nobody should be spending Bitcoin. So it's good money. So I mean, I think there's truth to Gresham's law, and so therefore the money I want to spend is the shittiest form of money I have. So I get rid of what's the shittiest, and so I get rid of my worst money first, and when I have no more of that, my second worst, and then my third worst, and the last money I get rid of is my best form of money. And I think empirical evidence has demonstrated, it's a factual statement. It's a quantitatively correct and accurate statement to make that we have now here. 15 years of experience with Bitcoin. That's a valid sample. And based upon this valid sample, it's a mathematical, how basically we state facts using the scientific method is applying the scientific method to what is the best form of money. Bitcoin empirically is the best form of money. There is no better form of money than Bitcoin. So it's the last money anyone should spend.
Well, so the point that I'm making here is that Bitcoin can be a good savings asset, but when it comes to countries adopting it, we've seen 4 or 5 countries adopt Bitcoin. And what you see is they figure out that, if I want to buy a dozen eggs, I can't wait 10 minutes at the checkout with a line behind me of other people that want to buy their lettuce and whatever else. So they layer on it the Lightning Network, which then ends up centralizing decentralization, because they say, hey, give us your Bitcoin public address and we'll link your name and your phone number, and maybe it's some other identifier, maybe a date of birth or an address to it. So in effect, with machine learning and artificial intelligence, they link that public address for Bitcoin to them, so they've centralized decentralization. Whereas the digital world and everything we're contemplating and talking about today, it actually does the opposite. Everything that you actually start linking, wallets, apps, assets, it basically uses derived keys that doesn't link up. So when we were creating those businesses and I scanned it, and it came up with that derived cryptographic key, which then ties to 12 words, that then ties to your original 12 words and then to your fingerprint, so your identity. Literally, it's not just savings versus checking or centralized, decentralized systems, but we're talking about the future of decentralization in real time. So what this chart...
The problem you have with payments, though, is the fact that no crypto is a good payment, because outside of quote stable coins, which I don't like, and I think the stable coins are only stable with respect to themselves. What you want a coin to be stable to is stable with respect to purchasing power, and stable coins are not stable with respect to purchasing power. And that's the type of stability we want in a coin. In money is to be stable with respect to purchasing power.
Well,
so the dollar isn't, no fiat money is stable with respect to purchasing power. But if you look at countries around the world where most transactions are transacted in, okay, they don't accept any other form of legal tender other than their own fiat money. So therefore, you're never spending the money, you're selling it. So every time you buy it and sell it, you're creating a taxable transaction. So
think about this.
You're creating a transaction that you have to file a tax return
about.
Any money that you're using that the government says is not legal tender, and what you're doing is you're buying and selling a commodity, and every time you buy and sell it, you have to record it, and then you have to report, then you have to pay the capital gains tax on it, so you have capital losses on it, and you have to go to a different section of your tax return to itemize all that stuff. Then that's an expensive coin transaction, because it has a lot of transaction costs, because you have to now record a lot of things you don't have to record, with fiat money. So then what becomes the utility of that token if the government doesn't acknowledge it as legal tender. That's the problem.
Let me throw something at you real fast and then take that same lens and use it on the same logic here. So let's say that what we're looking at here is $14 billion in daily transfer in the equivalent of US dollars, because that's about what the Visa system actually transacts in a daily period. If they're charging 2.4% on average, that's $336 million in transaction fees every day. And what they're looking at is 3.5 seconds to approval, but not settlement. Ethereum is about 3 minutes. Bitcoin is about 10 on average. And when you look at the digital world and the systems that we're talking about, we're talking full settlements from 3 to 5 seconds, sometimes up to 8, but we're talking always under 10 seconds. The cost of it is less than 1,000th of a cent. And here's the kicker, and this is the point that I want you to dig into. What if I told you to be able to get into this asset, this native asset, or any of the other assets that tie to it? What you're doing is you're actually purchasing a real. So for instance, in this case, what you're looking at here is you would purchase a real silver ounce. So for those that are looking at the video stream, I'll show you one in real time. So let's say you actually purchase a real ounce of a material, whether it's gold, whether it's silver, etc., but you're buying something that actually can be converted into something that's of value for humanity. For instance, to build a car, you need X.
But again, if it's not legal tender, then every time I do something with it, I'm buying it, selling it. I'm not spending it.
Change,
That's the problem.
just change the perspective.
If it's not legal tender, I'm never spending it. I'm selling it. Okay, and I'm creating a taxable transaction.
No, turn on.
So every time I take fiat to buy this coin, I have to put a ledger entry in to preparation for my tax returns. Every time I sell it, I have to put another ledger entry in, and then I have to do my accounting for last in, first out, whatever I decide to do, and how I recognize profits or losses associated with it. But I'm not. They're assets. They're not money. They're not transaction money. They're not legal tender. They might settle quickly, but there's still the transaction cost associated with the fact that these are non-taxable transactions that you have to do a lot of recording on, and there's a cost of keeping all these records associated with all these transactions you're doing that you'll then have to report a P&L on them.
What if there was
so that's the cost of doing them.
Jeff, what if BitChute said, we will actually pay our team members, to your analogy that you used before, we'll pay our team members with, let's say, we're going to take US dollars and we're actually going to buy a digital asset that is physically represented. So we're going to buy a physical silver coin for $35, and then we're going to get a digital version of it. And you can actually take that digital version, but you're doing it, let's say, converting it into like Hawaiian dollar.
But that might not be deductible for my business because I'm not paying them in legal tender. So
that's the point. So what if I told you that
that's consequences of me paying them that way might create a tax problem for them and a tax problem for me. So
have you ever,
because I'm not using legal tender, and so they might not view it as compensation for labor. That's the problem.
Yeah, so there's two parts of it. One,
I wish these weren't problems, but they are.
Well, but
I mean, that's the world we live in.
you got to hear some of these lights before you judge them. So imagine two things. One is a silver eagle that's made by the U.S. Mint legal tender. It is. Is a silver round that is not made by the U.S. Mint legal tender. It's not. And if it's not,
Correct.
For instance, I know a lot of companies that actually make a lot of money, and at the end of the year, instead of taking and wasting the funds on this or that, they'll go buy a new business card that's actually a silver round, and literally they write it off, right? So when you look at what happened, this is to your point, in 1913, the taxation started. Income taxes for individuals, for businesses, etc. You know for a fact that the founding fathers of the United States of America did not intend for that to be a part of the system. It's a part of slavery too. They didn't intend for that to happen. And therefore, and there's some states
So
that have actually,
the Constitution defines money. Well, one is when people talked about the dollar, okay, that circulated, again, because most Americans are just completely ignorant, okay? When people in George Washington and James Madison and, you know, James Monroe and Jefferson were talking about a dollar, okay, what dollar were they talking about? Okay, they were not talking about the US dollar, okay? The US dollar is not what circulated. What the US dollar was called a continental, okay? That's hence the expression not worth a continental, okay? They were worthless. That was the US fiat money during the revolution, was a continental. What people walked around in, the most trusted currency in the US time was the Spanish mill dollar. They were gold or silver coins, and they were divided as, you know, watch a sea, Pirates of the Caribbean, the pieces of eights. That's why the stock market started trading in eights. That was the minimum divisible unit, because that was the minimum divisibility of these Spanish mill dollars. So when people referred to a dollar, they were not referring to a US dollar. Nobody believed in the US dollar. They believed in the Spanish mill dollar, these gold and silver coins. That was the primary currency in circulation at the time, gold coins.
and what
So
if,
some silver coins. And the Constitution's fixed, defined the dollar in terms of units of silver and gold. And that was fixed, okay? It wasn't meant to create a central bank, print your own money, okay? And then have it backed by nothing. No, they made sure the government didn't have that power. In fact, they said, once you give the government that power, tyranny is inevitable.
Mhm.
So anyone who supports fiat money supports tyranny. The
Yeah.
founders were smart enough to
And-
understand the linkage between the two. If people are too stupid today don't understand it, they deserve the tyranny they live under.
And so let's just say that BitChute actually saw let's say that the Hawaiian Kingdom was real, and the Hawaiian Kingdom said if they're going to issue the Hawaiian Dala, DALA, which was actually there before the US dollar was forced on them for commerce. Let's just say that they actually stood it up and they said there's no income tax, no sales tax, no use tax, no property tax in the Hawaiian Dala, and the Hawaiian Dala is actually backed by real assets. So when they actually issue it, they have to buy a real physical asset that then actually has a digital representation of that asset. So kind of like what I was showing you here, where people would actually come in, purchase an asset. So let's say BitChute said, you know what, we want to, and I'm not saying full pay, I'm just saying, let's say December 15th, there's money that's left over. Instead of just having a loss on the books, and so they pay, you know, XYZ, or let's say profit on the books, and so they pay ABC. What they do is they actually would say, we're going to buy these digital dollars and we're going to issue them or buy the physical dollars or buy the physical silver, get a digital dollar, and then we'll issue them to our team members. And the team members automatically get paid. It's instantaneous. And the team members can transact what they want. If the team members want to go back into the fiat system and they say, you know, I want to go buy XYZ at the store, they can put it onto a physical card that then they can actually go and transact. Now that is where the taxable event, and we're not tax authorities here, so people use your own tax judgment. But in my opinion, that's when it could possibly be construed as income. So when they're actually taking it into US dollars, where that's the first time they actually received a payment in US dollars. So what I would ask you to do, Jeff, is think about it in that context and think about it where you're on-ramping and off-ramping from what system. So if you start with the employers, because again, us humans, we're making money and we're spending money. So we do a job, we get some value, then we spend that value in other ecosystems. Those are two separate types of payments that we're basically a part of. If an individual is actually using a US dollar and gains that US dollar somehow, I'm right there with you that there may be a taxable event and reporting that could happen. The nice thing in this new system is it could also be automated. So this uses a triple ledger accounting system where, you know, a validator knows are validating them, but you can also, what if I said that you could actually file your taxes within these ecosystems at the same time? So when we go and look at some of these service providers, so let's click on providers and then we'll scroll down.
I think for any of these systems like this, you'd have to look at what the cost is of maintaining the ledger. You know, what are the tax consequences to you as a business and your employee? And then, you know, you'd have to study and see whether both you and the employee are better off, because you don't want to do anything unless both are better off.
Yeah.
So they both have to be better off.
I think
So you have to look at this stuff. I've looked at this in the past. I mean, I would like to, you know, not pay in dollars. I would not like to use.
well, why
fiat.
don't you and I have a
I
one-on?
don't want to use banks. But, you know, if you know, so how I live my life is one thing, but how I operate my business, where I have a fiduciary responsibility, is something very different. So if I have a fiduciary responsibility, it's not what I want, it's what's in best interest of all the stakeholders of the business, you know, and so far, you know, maybe you found something smarter than I have been able to find, you know, is a way of, you know, efficiently paying people in some form of value that's not legal tender, that doesn't create a complication for you and for them.
Yep, right there with you. Absolutely agree with you. And all I'm trying to articulate is the request that you just had about a system that you could actually start from day one and actually engage it. That's what is being put together here. And that's where, if multiple different states would see that, they can create their own policy around what is taxation. And not only that, but like, look at this. This is amazing. So when you look at how transactions actually occur, actually it's up here. Imagine if someone goes into a store, or let's say we actually did we're actually going through an active use case around this. Let's say a customer comes into a store, uses a QR code, pays that store for its value. Let's say it was buying a coconut, okay? And let's say there's sales tax within this jurisdiction. Let's say there's retirement or social security tax. Let's say you have the product and then the shelf space for the store. You could literally define all your costs of goods, and at time of transaction, everyone basically gets paid and all the accounting is all done. And let's just say that user went and they drank that coconut, and I don't know about you, but I'm fine if they're actually sour or, you know, whatever. But some people come back and say, you know what, I didn't feel right. I want my money back. My body hurt, blah, blah, blah. And so they basically, now they have to unwind all these payments that have actually been made. But what's gorgeous with this technology is you can claw it back for a period of time. So let's say you in terms of use, you give the user 30 days to get their money back. After 30 days, it's locked down, accounting's done, it can't move forward. But in this case, that user drank the coconut, didn't like it, got their money back, and all of the transactions all came back, and it's all the accounting was actually done within that system. And then what if there was actually no tax? So like you literally say, I'm just going to grab a screenshot here real fast and just say, you know what, there is no tax in this jurisdiction. So let's say this Hawaiian ecosystem says there is no income tax, there is no sales tax, there is no use tax, there is no, you know, retirement tax. And all they're going to do is they figure out that they can run the whole government on that normal 2.4% tax that the actual visas of the world basically have gotten so used to running things on. But this is a transaction that is in real time, no fees, no banks, no governments, unless they say, you know what, we're going to adopt it as a government, and we're actually going to remove all sales tax within it, all income tax within it. And so let's say BitChute wanted to actually do right by their team members and say, we'll pay you in Hawaiian dollar that's actually backed by a silver asset or a gold asset, whatever their jurisdiction is, right? And then if you actually want the gold, cash in your dollar. We'll give you the gold, ship it to you. If you want US dollars, convert it to US dollars. That's where your taxable event may start. If you want to just keep it in a digital asset and convert it over whenever you want to spend it on a physical Visa network, so be it. You basically just convert it. And all of this technology actually works today. Like when we talk about converting these things, here, I'll pull open that digital wallet. Like you can see right here how you've got, you know, a digital reward versus, so let's say you pay people in rewards. That's a whole nother conversation. Then they convert it onto their Visa card and used it in real time. Now, I agree with you that that's where the taxable transaction possibly could be. where they convert it into US dollars, because that could be construed as income. But if you don't get paid in US dollars, you tell me where the taxable event is. So that's why it comes back to jurisdictions, locations, states, nations, ecosystems that want to work together to free their humanity.
Yeah,
Literally.
but ultimately, if you want to scale, you know, right now you're limiting your scale, you know, to jurisdictions, you know, that are not huge, because most of the world is either on a euro standard or a dollar standard, you know, and they all cooperate with FACTA, and they all cooperate with the US, you know, and they all uphold sanctions regimes, and they all share information with the US. I mean, the rules are pretty onerous, and since people don't want to be locked out of the US, you know, they ultimately will, because they don't want to be locked out of the, you know, SWIFT. And the US can unilaterally lock anyone they want out of SWIFT. So, you know, so ultimately you got to play ball, you know, with the US, or if they're not happy with you, they'll lock you out of SWIFT.
And that's why I think
So this is the problem of thinking through how you really scale. And again, right now there might be things that you can do on a permissionless basis, because you haven't gotten to a size yet that the US feels threatened by. You know, as you scale, you know, the US might say, I don't give a shit about, you know, this digital world today. You know, if there are 5 million members or 10 million members, but if there are 100 million members, then the US will say, well, how do I strangle you with regulation? You know, so you have to think about not the framework whatever your regulatory framework is today. As you scale, it'll become geometrically, you know, hyperbolically, you know, more aggressive, antagonistic towards you. So you have to anticipate that. You know, nobody listens to me when I give that advice. So, but they all regret not listening to me when I give that advice. So, you know, all these platforms that issued all the ICOs, and they all were laughing and fun. I said, look, you know, once you scale, the SEC is going to investigate you, and you're going to be spending a lot of money on legal fees. They're not paying attention to you now, not because they're stupid. They're not paying attention because you have no economic activity.
Yeah. So
you're irrelevant. The day you're no longer irrelevant, you know, then the SEC is going to get involved in your life. You know, I assume that the reason why there are these settlements with Coinbase and things like that, my assumption is that they negotiate these settlements because they're now arms of the CIA. So, you know, and that's why the government lets them live, because they've decided to serve the surveillance state. So I say, look, I'm negotiating with you. Here's the deal. You're going to pay $1 trillion and I'll put you out of business, or I'll give you some small fine that I can announce to the world that I punished you with a fine. But now I own you. Now you got to report everything to me. I don't want to have to go for subpoenas and things like that. You know, whatever I ask you to give, you got to give. If you read the consent decree, you know when Facebook had a consent decree for how they use data, you know, against their own terms of service in 2011, 2012. So 2011, 2012, Facebook went to the government and said, look, I'm going to agree to never do this again. And they paid a small fine. Then when the scandal came with the Cambridge Analytica, you know, that was a violation of the previous consent decree. So Facebook paid a $5 billion fine to get themselves listed from that consent decree. Okay, the economists signed who did the analysis of how much value Facebook got from its breach of the consent decree was somewhere between 500 billion to $1 trillion. That's what the economist said, is how much value was created by Facebook for its breach of the agreement, and the government only fined them $5 billion. So let me tell you, who would be willing to pay a $5 billion fine to create $500 billion of income? Okay, everybody. That's called an efficient breach. So everybody would breach under those conditions. But why did the government do this? Because another part of the consent decree was now Facebook had to give access to any information the government wanted whenever the government asked. So they're happy that Facebook gets more and more information because that information now is more and more information for the CIA and all the government entities. So they want these platforms to succeed because now there's less that they have to get from subpoenas. Now it helps enable the surveillance state without them ever needing, a subpoena against anyone. They just rely upon the third party doctrine of you have all your information with these platforms. They don't need to ask you and get a subpoena. They just ask the platforms and they get it all from the platforms. So I'm sure this is what's happened with Coinbase. I'm sure this is what happened in Binance and all these other platforms. They're all now arms of, the CIA, the security state. So unfortunately, this is what happens. You scale the wrong way. You created the initial, the original sin, and you can't ever, you can't return back from that original sin. So once you've had that original sin and you're caught with that original sin, as you scale, what you helped scale will then be used against you, and it'll give the government more bargaining power over getting what it really wants from you, which is I'll let you stay in business, I'll let you keep the money, but knowing I can shut you down anytime I want. Be a good person, behave, do everything I tell you, and they're all arms of the state. So when you're dealing with all these platforms now, you got to think about, that these are all state-run enterprises.
Yeah.
So and they're all reporting, to the CIA and the FBI and
So what
the entire surveillance state infrastructure, and that's why they're allowed to continue to exist.
and the problem,
And that's why the government wants these platforms to succeed, because they're the ones that, that are cooperating. So platforms like me, the government will try and kill. So that's why I won't build an app and I won't do any things that'll make myself, vulnerable to those type of attacks, because I expect them. So I'm not unprepared for them. I'm not engaged in wishful thinking, and that as we scale, that the environment that helped me scale will continue to help me survive. It won't. So you have to give that consideration of how you build anti-fragility into the system that, again, you might not need at this scale, but if you're going to scale to create value for everybody here, then there will be more complications. So I don't mean to, maybe I'm boring everyone here, and that's not
no,
what
you're
I'm
spot
trying to
on.
do.
You're absolutely making the case for the problem statement
Oh,
and
heck no.
the solution.
Oh, heck no.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? The solution that actually what we're addressing here and showing you here can actually be the alternative to that. But your guidance around saying, pay attention to this and make sure you're doing it's spot on. And the thing that's important is folks that actually want to help be a part of the solution need to also work together, communicate, help. And I believe that people like me can learn massive lessons from people like you. Why? It's like what I said at the beginning of this call. I believe specifically, even with the Republic and the Founding Fathers, I believe that you have forgotten more than most people know about a lot of these topics. And we're so grateful for you taking the time to educate, to share your knowledge, your wisdom, and for helping what you did with Gab and Parler and BitChute, and just for the education process throughout your life. We're so grateful for it. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that every day is a blessing, and it's a blessing to be able to spend time with you, Jeff, along with all of the other callers on these people, and not just here, but as we build this and grow it and come to an understanding that we can't just sit back and say, well, that's all the problems that you just talked about, Jeff. Well, that's just how life is, and we're just going to sit back and do nothing about it. We have breath, we have life, we have time. We've been given opportunities by our Creator, whatever we all think that is. But I think that every day is a valuable gift, and we have the opportunity to actually do something for the future generations that's the opposite of what these folks want. I mean, what if we just back up 5 years and say COVID's not on the books, the vaccinations are not on the books, all the other conspiracy theories over the last 5 years, voting messes, all this stuff has not even happened, right? Let's just look at where the next generations are going with their ability to have their own minds and their own choices and their own freedoms and their own time not stuck in these dinky devices, but being able to live life and to procreate and to be able to make connections and not be stuck into this certification, that registration, that permit, that we're here to be free, to your point. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with each one of you to at least build something that can be passed on to the next generation, instead of just sitting back and saying, you know what, war is inevitable, death is inevitable, you know, mass genocide is inevitable. But do we understand why these people want to do this? No. Yeah. So I agree, I'm thankful for all of
I
it.
mean, I strongly agree with your statement. However bad things are, however difficult it is to build the system, then they do it that way to discourage people from thinking to even try. These are all barriers to entry. I don't want anybody to even try. So I'm going to make the barriers so onerous for people that most people will say it's too much effort to try. Let me just go along to get along.
Yeah.
So, however skeptical I am about, the fact of whether with my endeavors I'll ever succeed, in accomplishing the goal of freedom, I'm never going to quit. So I'm never going to let them discourage me. So they don't. I'm a sovereign individual, and there's nothing and I'm not going to live as a slave to their incentive structures. I live as a free and sovereign individual, which means I make the choices on my behalf. And I'll live with the consequences of them. But I'm not gonna subordinate myself to anything, because then I'm a slave. And we're free individuals. We're free sovereign individuals, self-sovereign individuals. And as difficult as they want to make it for people to live as a self-sovereign individual, means we have to fight that much harder to preserve it.
Mm. Amen. Amen. Any other feedback, comments? Thank you for those that are in attendance. I know we're gone a little bit long than we normally do, but I think the dialogue has been very important to be communicated. And I know some of these things may be heavy subjects. They may be difficult. They may be unbelievable. But it is a great time to be alive. I mean, look at all the good stuff that we have all around us. There's so much convenience. And I would say there's even peace in the world, even though I watched earlier today a children's hospital get blown up by a nasty missile, big missile, right in the middle of Kyiv. Many children died, hundreds of people injured, 5 kids. This stuff doesn't need to happen. But on the flip side, 61 million plus people died in the Second World War. And our generation never saw that. The things that we're seeing in our generation could be so much worse. And I'm grateful for the peace. Maybe it's before a storm, but I'm grateful to be able to have knowledge and time and understanding to actually help to build systems with all of your help and with all the teams, especially the dedicated teams when times are difficult. Systems are slow and resources are limited, because a lot of the stuff that Jeffrey's talking about, they can't take everything from you if you don't care about all of the everythings. And there's a point where seeing all the blessings that we have is a part of the solution to be able to not be controlled. And I think that we've all been massively blessed just to have the knowledge that we've had to live on the earth in this time frames. I don't know about you, but when I woke up, my body didn't hurt. I'm not hungry all the time. Education, knowledge, systems, cash. We have so much to be blessed with. And for us to just go and jump on, like in that Wizard of Oz thing that talked about the Tin Man that just worked his whole life, and that basically would just go and suck on the booze and watch the TV at night, those things really are traps. They really are. I've watched so many, and I've worked with so many indigenous communities, and it's not even right to call them indigenous. It's not what they are. But I've watched so many of these different cultures that basically have colonialism that comes in and drugs them and takes away their choices from simple things of diet and medical systems, which they think are going to help them. You know, just yesterday, there's a wonderful gal, Japanese lady, her husband in his 50s, and he got testicular cancer, and they basically went and put him on chemo, and then he died. And they were like, why would you die from that? That's not that big a deal. They went and did an autopsy. It was like he died from the chemo. He didn't even have cancer. My point is, and I don't want to say bad stuff about everything, but we've done so much in the centralized systems with healthcare, with insurance, with pharma, with even that we know that the centralized systems are real. The secret combinations behind them are real. The stuff Jeffrey's talking about, it's real. But that doesn't mean that we just shirk from the responsibility that we all have, because we have the knowledge. We've been given the knowledge of what is right and what is wrong. And decentralization is a true and correct principle that can actually be the counterbalance that solves all this stuff. But everyone has to actually say, or not everyone, but a chunk of people have to say, I'll actually use it. And I think, you know, to your point, Jeff, what if we actually used the voting system to run a parallel election? We know that people aren't going to count it, but it'd be some interesting data. And what if I told you that we've got about 4% of the states already built up where they can actually, and we're not forcing it to say, hey, you know, you have to live within this region, but it would be easy to do. It's not our core competency on the voting side of it. That's not what we do today. But I think that's one of the small advancements that this technology can actually give to humanity. The big advancements: identity management, financial management, asset management, and dispute management. I'm not even talking voter management, but the technology in front of us today is capable of all of that in spades. And you talk about, you know, limiting government and limiting the overreach. It's not just because they don't do it well or efficiently, or they don't care, or they want to just control or abuse. It's because we're here on earth to choose to learn right from wrong. Even if we're doing stupid things, make the wrong choices, we still get to be responsible for those choices. And maybe it's not something that, you know, the world sees, or what we do. We learn from it as individuals. And then, you know what? We're going to take our last breath. And Jeff, I know you're not in the US today, but I hope that when you take your last breath, I get the opportunity to come and actually visit your funeral and be there. And maybe the things that, and I don't know your family situation, I don't know your kids, I don't know any of that stuff, but I'm just grateful for your involvement in humanity to help so much, because you've made a difference, even though you may not feel like fighting the behemoth of YouTube and the behemoth of this and the behemoth of Google and the behemoth of Apple and Facebook and government. I know there's so much there, but I really believe that people like you that stand up and say, I'm going to dedicate my life to this for the right reasons. And your better half, or your other half, or your family that stands by you and puts up with the garbage that's around it, like mine does. Mine, you know, not even, I mean, it's even on so many levels, you know, and even the family here, all of us that show up every week, and we do this together, we learn together, we grow together, we find problems together, and we even, you know, it's not always rosy and positive. I mean, we got systems out right now. We got finances that are being attacked. We got, like, I can point so many negatives, but the reality is we got another day. What are we going to do with it? So I'll leave you with that. Much love, and we'll talk to you later. We'll see you next week, same time. Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Bye, Margaret.